I wanted to start with what comprehensible input is not. And I have some notes here. So it's not a grammar-driven curriculum. I have to interrupt myself right there here at the beginning. Grammar is properly spoken speech. So I would like to ask you, and this is coming from a grammar teacher for 24 years in South Carolina. I taught advanced placement, French language and literature, and I was just moving and grooving for 24 years with the grammar. I love the pluperfect subjunctive in particular. It's my favorite thing in the world. But the problem was that after 24 years of doing that, I had very small classes in my upper level classes. Maybe some of you can relate. And I also burned out 6 times during those 24 years because I couldn't understand why my 9th and 10th graders didn't like my class, and I didn't understand why they couldn't understand what I could understand, which is that in the past tense, when the helping verb is avoir, the past participle agrees with any preceding direct object, including relative pronoun objects. Isn't that just cool? Isn't that just like the best thing in the world? Not for everybody. So I went to teach middle school, and I had the great good fortune of driving down to observe a colleague named Susan Gross in Colorado Springs. I came back and I saw, wow, that's what I want to do. And I was in the middle school, so I couldn't take the grammar curriculum, the textbook definition of grammar, into my classroom in middle school. You know, like those kids would go like, what? So luckily I met Susan Gross, and I owe her my career since then, that was 19 years ago. So add up 24 and 19, and you will end up with how many years I've been teaching. And I just feel like I'm starting my career right now. I wish I could have another 40 years, because teaching a language is gas. It's just fun. It always hasn't been fun, but it's fun now. It's so ironic that God plays tricks on us. You know, you think I don't want to do this for 42 years, but you keep going in every day, and you get so burnt out, and every year I'm done. And now I'm going like, can I teach all summer? Can I have a job? I want to teach some French. It's so much fun. So that's the first sentence, is comprehensible input instruction is not a grammar-driven curriculum. Comprehensible input, point 2. I'm just going to make a bunch of points about it. Is not a textbook-driven curriculum. Actually, I'm sorry, I have to make another observation. The term textbook-driven curriculum is full. It's riddled with inconsistencies in terms of the research. You're going to hear me a lot during this time talking about the idea of the research. You know, there's a chasm between the research and the textbook. You probably wouldn't be watching this if you didn't know that already. Textbook-driven curriculum. I'm of the firm conviction, after 42 years, that the curriculum is the language. The textbook, one time, have you ever been to one of those in-services? Right? Maybe some of you guys are in one right now. And I was in Jefferson County before I went to Denver Public Schools, Jefferson County, Colorado. It's a western suburb, western part between Denver and the mountains. And I went to a in-service, and during that in-service, I smile now, but I wasn't smiling during that horrible day, when the director of foreign languages for the district which is the eighth largest district, I think, in the U.S. I don't know how many, there were like 120 of us language teachers. And she said, okay, it's in service. Spend the day writing your curriculum. And everybody, every single person, I couldn't find anybody that did not. They were all sitting per school. You know, you sit with your colleagues. And I'm sorry. I was like a lost man, a lost person. I was lost because I was saying, well, hey, let's design a curriculum we have all day, and we're all language teachers and we never get to see each other. Let's do it. And every one of them looked at me like, you're crazy. And they said, get out of here. I go to another table, move away. We're busy. And they were busy. Their textbooks were open, and they were copying the table of contents, and that was their curriculum. And they were going to go in that year and teach that stuff. You know, talk about conflicting with the research. And Krashen's in particular, natural order of acquisition hypothesis, which, you know what, I won't go into right now, but it conflicts. So what I've said so far, I've made 2 points, and I'm going to make about 30 points. And I understand that we have a lot of, I'm going to close this window. We have a lot of, close that door, sorry. We have, what I understand from Teachers Discovery is we're going to be talking, you guys have been asking questions as well. And so I'm kind of looking to my right and I'm seeing questions, but actually no actual questions, but feel free and we'll address those as we go. That's what I've never done a webinar before, so I just assume that's what that is. Okay, so I made 2 points. Comprehensible Input is not a grammar-driven curriculum. It is not a textbook-driven curriculum. It is not a list of isolated vocabulary words. You know, we bow down to the lists. I won't go into that right now. Come to that later. You know, they need to learn their colors. Why? So they can go to France and stand in the middle of a sidewalk and go rouge, bleu, vert. Or if they get really creative, they can go by the side of a building and point to something yellow and say jaune. It's just funny to me. So languages exist in context. Contextual richness is what allows the unconscious mind to, by the way, if you're wondering what that ugliness behind me, it's my studio on the other side of there, and I'm trying to make some videos for my Facebook site and my PLC. So I make videos back there, so that's why it's so ugly. Lists of isolated vocabulary words, like the rooms in the house. And then you're going to go test them on the rooms of the house. So in case they happen to be in a house in France, there's my son, goes to Columbine High School, Luca. He's going to be a senior. Luca. So when we focus on, bless our hearts, when we focus on lists of isolated vocabulary words, we end up ignoring the rich context, the contextual input that alone reaches past the conscious mind into the unconscious mind, where I know if you're watching this video, you understand that language acquisition occurs below the surface of the water. It's a divine kind of thing. Language is an infinitely big possibility of combinations of different words that we could never predict, that the unconscious mind is in complete control of. That the more we spend time thinking about the language, you know, putting our students into thinking about them like worksheets and memorizing rules and all that stuff, the more we do that, the more we don't allow this, I don't know, there's no word to describe the magnificence of the process that occurs out of our awareness in the unconscious mind. Magical, beautiful, because all we have to do, and it applies to everybody, has nothing to do with IQ, because there's some pretty low IQ people in the US perfectly fluent in the language. All we have to do is listen, sit back, listen, relax. And I can see my face in this, so here's what I'd see in my students when I'm doing a good story or something. When I'm doing uninterrupted comprehensible input. You know, not like 1 minute in L1 and 2 minutes in L2 and then back and then 30 seconds in one and 20 seconds in the other. And you know how we do. That is a cardinal no-no. But here's what their faces look like. Watch the edges. Maybe I can't make it happen, but it's like, that's an engaged student. That's an observable nonverbal behavior. Why nonverbal? Because our students don't speak the language yet. And the worst thing, by the way, this is all my opinion based on my own study and research and training that I got in Denver Public Schools, which is an early seedbed in the early 2000s. Diana Noonan is just incredible. She's led that district for 20 years now in comprehensible input. She's fearless. And I'm a beneficiary of both Susan Gross and Diana Noonan's leadership in Denver Public Schools, and Krashen and Blaine Ray. Blaine Ray made Denver Public Schools his flagship district. He used to come here all the time for comprehensible input, TPRS. And I owe those guys big time because they saved my career. And for 20 years, what I've learned from them has percolated into, for me, my latest book about the invisibles. I know we have the big CI book to talk about and other books from Teacher's Discovery, but it's just percolated and keeps getting better and better and better. I'm kind of digressing right there. I was talking about the beauty of the process. I'll leave that alone. We'll go on. Comprehensible input is not the teacher talking at the students. It's not learning about a language. It's not immersion. Usually immersion translates into submersion, unless you use comprehensible input in the proper way with the proper skills and proper strategies. I'll have a lot more to say about that later. I'm going to quote the great comprehensible input, great German teacher from Los Angeles named Robert Harrell, who says here, he says, I use messages in the target language that my students find compelling and understandable to help them acquire the language unconsciously. Actually, I changed a word in that. He said, I use messages in the target language that my students find interesting and understandable to help them acquire the language unconsciously. The reason I changed it to compelling was because Dr. Krashen started using the word in his writing in 2008, 2009, right about in there. And he changed it from interesting to compelling. Now, I have a problem with that, by the way, because having burned out 6 times when I was teaching out of the book, and having thought about how we acquire languages 24/7 for the last 42 years, it's been, have you ever, you think you're a sick person because that's all you think about? You wake up and you go, wow, so I write a book about it or something. It's so intense that I don't need for Dr. Krashen to say now I have to make my comprehensible input stories compelling, and I have to do that 5 times a day, and I'm just barely learning about comprehensible input because all of us, me included, are just, after 20 years, just scratching the surface of what this is. This is not a cool new way to teach. This is a total paradigm shift. And in 100 years, they won't even be talking about this kind of thing because everybody will be teaching this way. But shoulders, weight on shoulders. responsibilities within the school, responsibilities with oppositionally defiant students, responsibilities at home, stuff going on at home, stuff happening. Our shoulders just get weighed down. I mean, you know, there's a Japanese term, gaosho. It means to bow down to. I bow down to everyone I'm talking to because, and you're going in for another year. Okay, like I did it for all of those years. We all have to go back in service. So, and I know it's that time. So bless our hearts. Crashing doesn't need to say compelling. I'm trying to make it barely interesting. Okay. Anyway, sorry. Back to Robert. I was in the middle of a quote. I use messages in the target language that my students find compelling and understandable to help them acquire the language unconsciously. Okay, here's your first quiz. What's the most important word in that sentence? I'll read it again. I use messages in the target language that my students find compelling and understandable to help them acquire the language unconsciously. Now, I understand I have input over here on the right. I want to see who gets it right. Who gets to identify the most? Thank you. It is unconsciously. Yay. Unconsciously, because we teach this way because the research shows that people acquire languages unconsciously. I'm going to drop that for now, go to another point. We've got a lot of stuff to do here to go through. We do not teach, or we should not, according to the research, teach in the same way that other classes are taught in our buildings, like math and chemistry, which require linear thinking. Left brain, linear, this implies that, this implies that. And we try to apply that because of the nature of the way schools are built, structured, the so-called full curriculum, the false curriculum of the book, because the language is the curriculum. We in schools, have tried to apply a linear curricular design to a process that is whole brain. So it's not about studying the language at all, but about understanding the message. Now, if you don't have a lot of time and you need to cut out here, this is a good place to stop, because this is everything in one sentence. I got a ton of stuff to say. I'll probably get teachers likely to cut me off, but if you do need to jet, as they say, just let me say this one more thing, and then you got everything. It's not about studying the language at all. It's about understanding the message. Studying the language is a linear, left brain, analytical process. Understanding the message is a whole brain, right brain dominant, nonlinear, absorbs into the unconscious mind process. And so if you're just exploring comprehensible input, what you want to do is you want to make that shift. You want to figure out how you can shift your instructions to where you just see your students kick back, extremely rigorous and effortless. What, Slavic? What are you talking about? Yes, it's effortless and rigorous. But rigor, not defined in terms of as Robert Harrell once said, I remember this, does 40 math problems for homework, is that more rigorous than 20? Getting more homework, is that rigor? No. Look up, I actually have it somewhere in here, the United States State Department definition, here it is, definition of rigor. Rigor includes here's the quote, sustained focus. Think of the CI classroom. Think of the kids listening to a story. Just check this out. It's perfectly aligned with the State Department's definition of rigor. Sustained focus, They want to know what happens next. Depth and integrity of inquiry, but it happens on an unconscious level. Suspension of premature conclusions. That is to say, we don't want to draw conclusions about the grammar system of the language, its proper structure, until after we know the language. And a continual testing of hypotheses. That's happening on an unconscious level at all. So it aligns with the State Department Comprehensible Input does. I'm just going to keep rolling here. I'm going to skip over some stuff because we've got so much to share. Here you go. Teaching using comprehensible input in its ideal form in the classroom is speaking with students in a way that every student understands. Everyone. Allow me, please, to say that if we don't address the problem of equity and inclusion, or a lack of it, in our wonderfully diverse society, and if we continue to do what we're doing, where we don't reach all our students, then we need to change so that we address the equity piece. Well done comprehensible input, where all the students are included, is a way to help solve our pain as a society, all that we're going through. Because can you just imagine, this is so, it's so beautiful to think of classrooms, foreign language classrooms all around the United States, where you go in and all the kids are engaged. They want to be there. They want to know what happens. And it doesn't matter what color they are. If you haven't noticed, I'm big on America. Let's be patriots and teach all the kids. Okay, so, and let's stay in line with what democracy is all about. Okay, so, oh boy, I think I'm just going to go on to, I'm just speaking to people who are like brand new to comprehensible input. There has been in our profession over the years a tendency to focus on input and output. It's a legacy from the 20th century when we didn't focus until Krashen's work started in the 70s. And I started teaching in the 70s, 77. If we are working with children and we think that we need to teach them how to speak and write, the output skills, we're making a mistake. Let's look at some numbers. Sorry, I was about to go on a bike ride because it's mountain time out here and I forgot you guys are on the East Coast at 1 o'clock. But I wanted to have like some stuff around me, like a little whiteboard and stuff. I'll just say the numbers. 1,000, 10,000. 10,000. That's how many hours we need to get command of a language. You know, we can't ever have pure fluency because we weren't born in the country, but to really master a language, 10,000 minimum. Oh, by the way, if you're a Chinese Mandarin teacher, I learned this from Linda Lee when I was teaching at the American Embassy School in India three or 4 years ago. 24,000 hours. Now, in a 4-year program, I'm most familiar with high school, we have 500 hours available to us in a 4-year program. That's 125 hours, do the math, etc., per year. 500 hours in a 4-year program. 10,000 hours are needed to master a modern language. We have that. What's the math? 125 hours over. The math is 1/20th. We have 1/20th of the time we need to get a student to really have command over the language. We have 1/20th of the time we need if we use every single instructional minute Okay, so, and if we use, which I recommend, 50%, if we try to stay in the language 50% of the time for comprehensible, I know that ACTFL says 90% of the time, but ACTFL people are not classroom teachers. They're theorists. And they wrote this position statement. I don't know how long it's been around. But one time I tried to stay, one time in part of my career in Denver Public Schools, I tried to stay in the target language. I was really hot to trot. I was ready to go 90% of the time. It about killed me. So y'all, if you're going to the classroom for another year of teaching and you read that position statement, we all need to write an email to Paul Sandrock, and we need to say, Paul, you're the director of curriculum, education, or whatever for ACTFL. Change that 90% down to 50% because that's about all we can do. Thank you. Got to call roll. Got to worry about that oppositional student. Got to worry about this. Got to worry about that. 50% is good. Just don't mix it back and forth. Like I said earlier, very important point. Not 10 seconds in L1, 20 seconds in L2. Yeah. Okay. So if you can, that's not 125 hours, or that's not 500 or 125 hours per year. That's half of that. That's, if you're staying with me on the math, that's 1/40th of the time we need. I'm gonna say that it's 1/40th of the time we need to get a kid good at a language. Now, have you ever built a house? Let's say it takes you 100 days to build a house. Okay, 100 days, but you only get 5 days. Actually, you only get 2.5 days. You're going to be limited to building that house in 2.5 days. Do you see the analogy? Here's your question. Would you try to build that house in 2.5 days like you were ordered to? That's the amount of time you have. Or would you just try to build a good foundation for the house in that amount of time? The research says that we acquire languages by using comprehensible input. That's the fact of the research. We have no research on the textbook. But we do know that comprehensible input is the way people acquire languages. Now, would you build a foundation, or would you try to stuff the whole house and get the whole house built? It's going to fall down. And that's why people after 4 years say, yep, I took a foreign language for 4 years and I can't say a word. Yeah, that's because the foundation wasn't there. And the foundation is about input. I really want to digress, but I don't have the time. I don't know, but I wanted to say that if a kid is, let's just make it quick. If a kid is playing in the backyard and he's 1 year old and he's got a ball, he makes a visual association with the sounds that come in when he hears the word from the adults around or whatever. Ball. And it's a rich context. It's not boring. He's not being told to listen, to learn a list of words. Okay, Johnny, you're 1 year old. Learn ball, learn truck, learn window, and learn these words. No, that's what comprehensible input is. It's a rich contextual input where he plays with the ball, he picks up the ball, somebody says, pick up the ball. And this happens a lot, so many times, and it takes that much. But pretty soon the language starts to take shape again. Let's look at this, how this happens. He looks at the ball, he touches the ball, it's tactile, visual and tactile. He hears the sound, he turns the sound into meaning because of the visual and tactile. And that's what our experience, that's what we try to get our kids to do in the classroom, is to experience a visual, meaningful, interesting thing that they want to hear about, and gradually they turn sound into meaning. Now, did this visual tactful / auditory thing that I say have anything to do about this, speaking? No. Does the kid speak? No, not for quite a long time. But I figured it out. In preparing for this webinar, I figured out 21,900 hours are how much a child has 12 hours a day. If you only count 12 hours a day, that's how much input he gets by the time he's 5 years old. That is a lot of input. And he still has trouble with this part and this part, the speaking and writing. That's the output. So as a comprehensible, if you're new to comprehensible input, my prayer is that you separate the idea of input, listening and reading, from output, speaking and writing, which occur after so much foundational work done. Back to our house, the foundation is built out of comprehensible input. You can build a house on it later, but let's not fool ourselves. 10,000 hours, we have 500. If we teach comprehensible input, if we use it in our classroom, half the time, which I recommend, take the weight off your shoulders. Don't go for that 90% fake. Build a foundation for the child. Keep the child in your classroom for 4 years. That'll assure your job security. And it will do something much greater than your job security could ever be. It will send a child out into the world after studying with you, feeling that they can learn a language, that they don't suck at it, with very pleasant, incredibly pleasant experiences of laughter, because that's another word that I use a lot in terms of describing comprehensible input. And they feel really good about themselves. And you can't get them to teach. See, the problem of our day in foreign language education is that we have put the emphasis on the instruction and on testing to see how much they know, when a lot of what they know is buried in the unconscious mind, can't even be measured. The tragedy, really, that's not too strong a word, is to have focused in our great country, put all these kids in these foreign language classrooms and made them feel stupid because they couldn't think their way to a foreign language. Does the kid with the ball in the backyard, is he thinking about the language? Listen, let me define what a language is. A language is a delivery device, a vehicle to communicate messages. And what all the great CI researchers are constantly kind of screaming at people is languages are acquired by the child focusing on the message and not on the vehicle for the message. What does a comprehensible input classroom look like? Oh, you know what? I want to, Fabiola, thank you, has asked this question. Can you show a lesson or an activity using CI? I would love to right now. I've invented in 2003 one-word images. I would love to show how to do that right now, because I don't think that one-word images are being done in the way I have. I would love to just establish how to do a one-word. It's a very subtle process. You know what? I'm sitting down. It's kind of awkward. But let me try. We kind of have to talk about classroom setup. The main thing is when you do a one-word image. Let me just pick that, because the question was, can you show a lesson or an activity using CI? One-word images. They're not the best, by the way. They're not the most creative. Individually created images are the way to go, but we won't go into that. This is my new books on the invisibles. Guess what? The main thing about one-word images is you establish a space in front of you, what I call a sacred space. And in that space, you're going to build this image in the imagination. Each child is going to go into their imagination, and they're going to see this thing develop. And you're not going to walk through that space because they will freak out. Because as to the degree that our children still have imaginations, and sometimes it's kind of hard to get them back into reimagining things, especially in high school. But it can be done. And you start, okay, this way. So I don't have the distance. I'm not standing up in a classroom, but let's say you have this distance in front of you between, it's kind of like an acting space that we all use in storytelling. And so the students are kind of not in the space. And so the first thing you do is say, I need an object. Food is good. Food's always funny, pizza. And we're going to create a creature out of food. We're going to create a creature out of any object that they think of. It's got to be a simple object, can't have a lot of moving parts. And so you listen, you know, and Sarah back in the back says, a taco. And it feels good to you, feels right. You feel like creating a human taco or a character that's a taco. And that's a one-word image. So you say, okay, give me, and they all throw out pizza, taco, car, whatever. And you say, okay, taco, let's work with taco. Use your hands to shape this out and ask 7 questions. I think the first question is grand petit, big or small. Look, I don't have the list. I'm not ready for that. I don't have the. Maybe we can do this another time. I don't have the questions you asked, the one-word image questions I've been asking for 17 years now in my classroom. You'd think I'd remember them. But you go through a big or small, rich or poor, mean or kind. You just give them the choices, and gradually a character forms in their imagination. And then you know what you do with that character once you get it built? That's the creation part. You create this one-word image, and then you go through and you review it. There's specifics to that. And then you write it up. And then you get to the most important part, the reading part. And then you do follow-up activities, extension activities from the creator, the character you created, and you go around like that. And it's a circular curriculum, and it's dynamite. And it's in my new Invisibles books. The problem is, Fabiola, I know that wasn't at all sufficient, but I've got all these questions here. I'm gonna go on. I was talking about, and Stephanie Rose, I'm gonna get to your question in 1 second. What does a comprehensible input classroom look like? I do want to talk about that. I'll just read, maybe get faster through my notes here. First of all, and this is a beautiful thing, it's going to look, a comprehensible input classroom, and just write in here if this is not what you want to hear. Because this is for you, and this is about you finding success and flourishing with comprehensible input. If this isn't working, and if I can go somewhere else with this, let me know. I'm looking at the comments. But this is a good topic, isn't it, for us? I mean, you're about to go into one if you're going to try to use comprehensible input in your classroom. So the question is, what does it look like? What would a comprehensible input classroom look like? And it's a good question, very germane to our discussion, so let's go. The first point is that it would look different for every single teacher, because comprehensible input is so flexible. It allows you to work with your own teaching personality. A lot of people say, I can't be Blaine Ray. Nobody can be Blaine Ray. He's a genius. I mean, he just naturally does incredible things with comprehensible input. And so a lot of us say, well, I can't do that. You know, we run back to the textbook. No, do it to reflect your own personality. And by the way, I am not a particularly effusive person in the classroom 5 times a day. There are teachers that teach using comprehensible input like that way, and they're all over the place. But by about the 3rd class, they're burned out for the day. Bless their hearts. Comprehensible input, Carol Gobb and Christy Placido, also giants in this comprehensible input world, to whom we owe a lot, came to my classroom in Denver one time, and after they observed my class, Carol said, "Gentle Ben." I didn't get into it, but I remember thinking to myself, yeah, gentle, because I have to survive. I have learned a way to go through and teach a story without getting all tired, quite frankly, when you have to do it 5 times a day. More things about what a comprehensible input classroom looks like. Here's one thing. The teacher speaks and encourages the students to first listen and then eventually start speaking unforced. That is to say, speaking without conscious effort. It happens about, if you use comprehensible input half the time in your classes, it happens that that emergence of unforced speech comes out in, like, not vomiting, but I mean, they start to speak in April of level 2. That's my experience. Silence, 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 a few words here and there with the fast processors, and then half the class starts like, shut up, just speaking in the target language in April of level 2. The teacher and students engage in a comprehensible input classroom in a conversation or dialogue. I'm gonna have to stop there because I got 2 really valuable things to say about that. They engage in a conversation. Well, I love the term, and this is Barbara Vallejos at Lincoln High School originated this term. Thank you, Barbara, because it's really valuable. Observable nonverbal behaviors. You can observe that the child is participating without them speaking, and you should grade them on that because they're working hard to earn that grade. And we don't probably have time to go into assessment, but I grade it 65% of their grade is based on what's Jen's great rubric on my PLC. I won't go into that, except to say that of the 3 modes of communication, we focus on the interpersonal skill. And by the way, if you're ever talking to a parent or an administrator and you want them to understand what the actual standard of communication is all about, explain to them, communication is about this. It has 3 aspects called the 3 modes of communication. You can really use this year. So take note if you're going to be talking to parents, and you will be. What you're asking the child to do, make the parent or the administrator understand that, or the counselor. You're asking the child to move into a different part of their brain, not think so much, and the 3 modes of communication as defined, and I always say this when I talk to parents, as defined by by my national professional parent organization called the American Council on Teaching Foreign Languages. Talks about 3 modes of communication. One is the interpretive, in which, if I'm a student right now, I interpret what I hear from the teacher. And the other second mode of communication is the interpersonal, reciprocal, back and forth. Teacher speaks because teacher is the only one in the room speaking the language who knows how to do that. But this other person is observable nonverbal behavior, means that the child is listening, paying attention, and that makes your classroom management problems go way down because they really want to know what happens. They'll put their phones down because it's more interesting than what's on their phones. And that reciprocal thing is the second mode of communication, back and forth, participatory, relational, dare I say, human mode of communication. That's the interpersonal skill. And the third is the presentational, which, as I talked about, speaking and writing happen way later, level 3 at the earliest. So let's get off our craziness about getting speaking early. And that's not just Ben Slavic's opinion, that is the research. So those are the 3 modes of communication that describe conversation, but I'm not done yet. If you please allow me to do this. I was living in France. Oh, I don't even think I have it. No, my printer ran out of ink just before. Okay, I have something in France. They leave it to the French. They wrote about the nature of conversation. And they talked about it being divorced. I wish I had my notes, but conversation is divorced from any planned outcome. It is pleasurable, which aligns with Krashen's research. He uses that term all the time. It involves a lack of pressure on you. It's such a wonderful experience. Conversation is a wonderful human experience, and we've turned it into kind of a, you can't do it, you can't speak well enough. Well, they haven't had enough time. I wish I had that conversation text. I don't. Okay, I'll leave that alone. We're still talking about what a classroom, comprehensible input classroom looks like. The teacher checks for comprehension regularly. Now, if you went to a workshop this summer and they said, oh, here's a way to check for comprehension, have them put their fingers up. I don't advise that because they lie. The lowest score you ever see is this. And yet half of them are probably, if they were to tell the truth, are about here, maybe. Half of them are about here. If you have a background using comprehensible input, you know what I'm talking about. Another thing they lie about is when you give them this and this. Hang on.
Are you on
It's
the...
East Coast. It was like I was.
Oh, okay. So sorry.
Okay. So sorry. Is they give you the up or down, and the teachers who say, well, give me the up or down on comprehension. Do you think a kid is gonna, like, everybody's looking at them, everybody's going like this, and then the kid's going to go, I don't understand. They don't have that much personal power. We've removed a lot of personal power from children in schools, but that's another topic. But this is empowering students with CI. This is not a good way to check for comprehension. This is not a good way to check for comprehension. Looking in their eyes is a good way. Again, thank you, shout out Susan Gross, who made up the phrase teaching to the eyes. You can see those observable nonverbal behaviors by looking in their eyes, and you can grade them on that, and it's official, and it's real. It's a good way to observe. You know if a person is understanding you and listening to you when you're in a conversation with the student. There is laughter in a comprehensible input classroom. The teacher encourages but does not force students to express themselves in the target language at all times. The teacher shelters vocabulary but not grammar. Another shout out to Susan Gross, who made that expression up. Sheltering vocabulary but not grammar. Harken back to the beginning of this session, and we talked about language being, grammar being properly spoken speech. We don't shelter grammar. We don't shelter properly spoken speech. We do shelter vocabulary. Sheltering vocabulary is a big deal. And the greatest expert I've ever seen in the world on this is Blaine Ray. I watched him enough times when he came to Denver that I began to see that he knew exactly what his class as a whole knew in terms of vocabulary. And he never, ever seemed to leave the domain of lack of safety by introducing vocabulary words that his students did not know. So sheltering vocabulary means keeping it simple so they can understand, and I have the ultimate skill for that. And I know some of you have the big CI book, and the book begins with a number of skills like circling and different things that we have to establish meaning to make sure that our students understand the vocabulary that we're using that day. All of those things that we do that are, I'm sorry, I just kind of like that book, the big CI book was written in 2014, are not necessary. Since then, I've developed a skill called Walk Before You Talk. It's in the newest book on the invisibles, and it encapsulates all of the, a little like button just floated past the screen. That's so cool. I'm not too familiar with all this tech stuff, but sorry, it distracted me. But when you work with students, and you're trying out for the first time, many of you probably are this year, and you want to use comprehensible input to communicate with your students in the classroom, but you have to do circling, I can't even think of those skills in that book, but if you have the book there, hey, Luke, would you get me those books in the next room? There's some books on that small table. And there are too many skills to learn is my point. Remember about the shoulders and the stress. And then somebody gives you a book and you have to have, oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, this book. Now, I'm going to read the skills. Circling. New teacher says, yeah, I learn that. Circling all three parts of the sentence, adding in details, circling vortex image, which is really cool, actually. I got that from Blaine. Circling sends messages, circling protocols, circling using emotions, parallel sentence, weak responses, power of circling, auditory focus. Next skill you got to do, you got to think about is slow. Why don't I just find the table of contents? Next skill is staying in bounds. Next skill is checking for understanding. Next skill is point and pause, teaching to the eyes, having a barometer student. Hey, you know what? I did that for 15 years and it just made me nervous because there were too many skills. I was trying to communicate in the language of my kids. It was so complicated. So guess what? I invented a skill that is the skill to rule them all, the ring to rule all the other rings. All the skills are wrapped up into one skill. Coolest thing in the world. It took me about 4 years to invent it. But I kept, the glimmer I kept seeing it. There's a way to do this, it's easy. So that skill is, it's not in that book. It's not even in this book, which is has all what I would call the philosophical underpinnings for the Invisibles, which is my new thing. That skill is not described in year one. This Teacher's Discovery 3-volume set over 500 pages. It's kind of like a schedule that you can follow as you go through the year. But the new book has this skill in it, and it also has its own schedule that's simpler. I can't remember what we were talking about, so sorry. I'm like a whole brain type of person, and if this isn't really logical and all that, I'm not going to apologize because that's who I am. Just a few more things. We just said that a CI classroom shelters vocabulary but not grammar. How about the teacher explores those topics and items that interest students as shown by their responses, reactions, and requests. For me, getting students interested is all about producing art. There's a great teacher up in Montana named Brian Whitney. Brian has just written a book to help comprehensible input teachers understand the art of drawing, to work even as an artist themselves. The guy's brilliant. We did a workshop once. That's not on the market yet, so I don't know. But I did want to mention that for me, engaging, you know what? I don't have to feel like I'm in a hurry here because I'm going to talk about the most important work of my entire life in teaching in 42 years. I get to have a second here to slow down and say what's really my deepest truth. And that is comprehensible input is best, most interesting and engaging for the children when you work with things that they produce, in particular drawings. That's what one-word images are about. That's what the individually created images. I wish I had my new book called The Invisibles and then another book called The Invisible Supplements. They're really one big book, 500 pages divided into 2 books. I wish I had it in a hard copy. I don't. It's only in electronic form, and I don't think Teacher's Discovery has it yet. It's available on my website, benslavic.com. Go buy it. But the Invisibles concept has the walk before you talk, the new skill in it. And it's all about taking a one-word image or an individually created image or an image created from a card, a student card. Won't go into that, it's too complicated right now. This is my truth. We create an image and we ask the kids questions about the image. Those of you who have done one-word images know what I'm talking about. And the class just comes to life. It's all detailed in my new Invisibles books, but it's not complicated. It's simple. So the work of my life of all these years has led to this one concept of we build surges in interest in our classes from the kids because of what they produced for us. Susan Gross always said, mean it. If you're gonna talk to your kids, don't fake interest. You know what I mean, right? Oh, really? Can I show you? 15. What age? The question was in French. How old are you? 15. Oh, really? You're 15? I don't give a shit. I'm sorry. I don't care. I mean, I don't really care. And like with PQA, well, I don't do TPRS anymore. With PQA, it's like, oh, Marie, you have two cats at home. We get 2 cats at home. Let's talk about that. That's PQA. That's interesting. Let's have fun talking about. I don't care if you have 2 cats. Which one's bigger? Which one's older? What are their names? I don't care. My mentor, anything I do is based on what Susan Gross taught me. And if Susan Gross said to me, mean it, and I tried for 15 years to mean it, I couldn't get into it. I had to develop in the last 4 years, since then, 19 years with Comprehensible Input now, I figured out a way to figure out how to really mean it. If you're going to go into a classroom, don't fake it. Those kids are so smart, they can see through all false interest. Another thing is that we see in a comprehensible input classroom is that we see rigor. We see sustained focus. We see a positive relationship between the teacher and the student. We see equity and inclusion. Underline that 50 times. Students often stay for the full 4 years because they like it. They may not act like it. We have so damaged our kids in school. We have so removed their imagination that they had when they were in primary school to this kind of slow death of imagination by the time they get in high school. We spark that. We rekindle that. We the sparkling in the classroom in a nice comprehensible input session. And so they may not act like they're interested, but they're interested. They're interested. Wow, Carol Gobb's watching this. And now I'm nervous. She's a great expert. Oh, well. Kids go home and they drag their parents to their website, to the school website. And they say, I really want to show you the picture I drew because the teacher picked my drawing. And we talked about it all day and we made a story up from it. And I can read the story. And on the side there is, why can they read the story? Because they made up the creature that is the basis for the story. Students smile a lot, and some of them are known throughout the school for the jobs they do. The student jobs is another thing. I was in a Chicago conference about 4 years ago, and I made up these student jobs. I've whittled it down in my newest books to about 17 jobs. I even have places where they sit called hubs. So powerful because it's an instant police force. If 17 students have jobs, in your classroom and there are 35 students in the classroom, 17 of those students don't want to be interrupted. They don't want to hear anybody talking around, and I teach them. I'm working here. I'm writing the story out, the artists say. Hey, I'm working here. Can you so you don't even have to, your classroom management, poof, problems go away, because you have these 17 students who are working with you to maintain focus on the creation of the image and then later the reviewing of the image. This is called the star sequence in my newest books. The star sequence where you go through and you end up reading and then doing it like the word chunk team game. I've been doing that for 15 years. I think it's just kind of getting out right now, but it's a really cool game. But yeah, you get kids that are really involved, and some of the artists, for example, attain rock star status in the school. The kids like learning the language, and the one thing you won't see in a comprehensible input classroom is, and this is Robert Harrell's expression, you won't see lots of worksheets, lots of homework, and lots of mind-numbing drills. Lots of homework, yeah, because students should be allowed to do homework if they want to. They've got enough other homework, come on, you know that. So we have, I'm going to kind of wrap it up here because nobody's sending any message from Teacher Discovery. I am looking at questions. Wow. There's a whole bunch of questions. Oh, here's one from, it sounds French. Audra Nolan? Nolan? I don't know. Mr. Slavic, Ben, please. Do you have a video of one of your classes we could watch? I'm a visual learner. Yes. Go to YouTube and look up Pringle Man. That's like the chips, the potato chips. Pringle Man. This is the first, it's 2015. I'm teaching at the American Embassy School in New Delhi, India. And you can see in this video, there are also some other videos in that set. One is called Candy the Corn with a K. You can watch those videos. So I just answered a question. We'll turn our attention to these questions now. Yeah, go to YouTube, look up Ben Slavic, Pringle Man. And at the beginning of that video, you'll see this kid I videoed the class, but I didn't allow my students to be seen, of course, because these were diplomats' kids. I mean, you couldn't even get a release on them. And you'll see I'm there, and this kid this is the beginning of my new life with Comprehensible Input in 2015. This kid hands me this thing, this Pringle on a little portable whiteboard. And in that moment, at the beginning of that video, Audra Nolan, I said, I'm just going to talk about this Pringle. Because it was so well drawn, it was cute. And so I just dropped my lesson plan and went ahead. So yeah, go to that. I also have a number of TPRS videos, but they were filmed in about 2009. They're very instructional with TPRS. I just don't do TPRS anymore. And by the way, my first 3 books, the Big CI book is a great transitional book, and I can understand why Teachers Discovery wants to talk about it, because it's a very important book. But it was the 4th of the books that I've written. The first 3 you can have at no cost. Just email me at benslavic.com. And if you're doing TPRS, I will send them to you at no cost. They are TPRS in a Year, PQA in a Wink, and Susan Gross thought that was her favorite book because of the combined focus in PQA in a Wink on personalization and classroom management. It's a good book, very good book. 10 years old, but still very good. And the 3rd book I wrote was called Stepping Stones to Stories. And then the big CI book, which is just so good. Put my heart in there. Put a lot of heart in this book. Put a tremendous amount of work and heart in this. But the new books are, that's where we work off of drawing, and that's where we are now. So the first 3 books I wrote about 8 or 9 books. Thought about this stuff 24/7. But the first 3 books I wrote, again, I'm going to repeat them. T. Paris in a Year, PQ in a Wink, and Stepping Stones to Stories. Just email me at benslavic@yahoo.com, and we'll send them to you electronically. Next question. We have a couple of resources that are great for teachers who are just getting into CI, written by Ben Slavic himself. I'm no expert. I'm just like you. Just some fool trying to get out of teaching worksheets. Oh, thank you. Yeah, she's just talking about the same books that I showed you. Christine Webb says, nice to hear 50% instead of 90%, so I don't feel like such a failure. Yeah, 90% is insane. It's insane. Hey, I'll tell you something else, Christine Webb. You know how we used to have bell ringers and we'd hand them a worksheet and they'd have to do the worksheet and we try to stretch that out as long as we could because it got them shut up. All the bell ringers do is shut the kid up. Why waste that time when you can be doing comprehensible input with them? Now, but not spoken comprehensible input because you got to recover from the last class. You're going to give yourself a 5-minute, you can choose between this. Let me ask you this. Would you rather have 5 minutes or 15 minutes between classes? 5, 15? I'm going to take the 15 because that's going to give me 30 extra hours if I take 10 minutes at the beginning of each class and do what's called free choice reading. It's a kind of a spin-off of the term Krashen's term, free voluntary reading. And you take some of those great novels from Carol Gauber, Blaine Ray, and Robert Harrell has great German materials. I'm trying to think of all the great stuff there is out there, the novels. And you make a big pile of them on a table and the kids come in silently and after you high-five them because you want to get that contact, and they come in, and Bryce Hedstrom, one of the greatest, taught me about this. I'm sorry, I know I'm going all over the place, but you got to hear this. If you get a fist bump, think about that for this year. If you stand at the door and get a fist bump, in chimp tribes, or I don't know what they call groups of chimps, if you get a fist bump, the chimp that's the most dominant is not the biggest physically or the most alpha type male. It's the one who gets the most touches with the chimps. That's the dominant chimp in the group. So the teacher, some of us are like, not 6 feet tall, but we have 6'3" football players walking in. Little fist bump that right there. That will establish your dominance in the classroom. Thank you, Bryce Hedstrom. Now back to what I was talking about. Now I forgot what I was talking about. Take the 10 minutes of free choice reading, whatever. And that term, free choice reading, is the right term, because if you put a bunch of Carol's or Blaine's books on a table and they walk in and they grab the book and they sit down and they read for 10 minutes, you're on your computer answering emails, calling roll, and getting all that ridiculous stuff that you have to get done while the kids are silently reading. And there's an assessment. There's an assessment model in this book and that allows you to actually grade them on how they read. So that's going to affect them. Sorry, we can't get an assessment here. I just don't see it, us having the time. So they're reading, you're answering emails, 10 minutes, 5 times a day. Some of you, bless your hearts, it's wrong for you to be teaching 6 or 7. Refuse. That's a formula for burnout. I know, because one time I accepted 7 classes in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and it was just a really bad year. But 5 classes times 10 minutes of reading, silent reading to start the class, 50 minutes. You get 50 minutes, almost an hour of time when you don't have to work. And also in this book, also called Electronically: A Natural Approach to the Year, Anity, in this book are a bunch of ways to use March and April and May as a way to get the kids doing projects. And when they do the projects, they're out of your face. Few free months where you know you're going to shut down the year pretty much in terms of all the work you have to do in terms of generating stories with the kids and all that hard work of comprehensible input instruction. Take March, April, and May off. The year ends for you if you have these projects that are in that book. So, but the thing is, there's a third way to grab extra time. So I figured this out. If you use comprehensible input in the way described in all these books and the new Invisibles books, you will teach 40% of the time you taught last year. That's less than half. You'll actually be instructing the kids 40% of the time. So Christine Webb, when you said nice to hear 50% instead of 90%, so I don't feel like such a failure, that's with, you get the 10 minutes, you get the end of the year project work where they're not, you don't have to mess with them at all because they're just very happy because you spent the whole year making them good at comprehensible input, so they can now manipulate it and use it in the spring. And then the other thing that you can gain time is with Fridays. This is the third way, the third trick. Do the word chunk team game. They love it. And you've spent the whole 4 days establishing vocabulary. Again, I won't go into the word chunk team game.